Everyone in 40,000 years of grim-dark mythology is afraid of chaos. Daemon possession, the whispers from the warp, a god that learns your name and rewrites your soul from the inside out. That is the nightmare everyone talks about. Chaos fans wave it like a banner, 8-pointed stars, screaming faces, 1,000 years of lore dedicated to cataloging exactly how completely it unmakes you. But there is something worse, something that doesn't need a god, something that requires no bargain, no whispered offer, no moment of weakness where you opened a door that should have stayed closed. Something that grows inside what's left of your mind with the patience of a geological process, and you can feel it happening, and you can't stop it, and there is nothing, no entity, no name, no altar to even direct your rage at. This is the Destroyer Curse. The case this script is building, piece by piece, is that it is the most psychologically terrifying fate for any conscious mind in the entire 40K universe. Not because the variants are violent, and not because the imagery is disturbing, but because of something far more specific and more damning. The more aware you are, the worse it gets. That isn't a rhetorical flourish, that is the documented lore. And by the time we reach the end, the distinction between the Destroyer Curse and Chaos Corruption will be precise enough to argue in court. Start 60 million years ago. The Necrontyr lived under a dying star in the Halo Stars region, and their sun was trying to kill them from the moment they were born. It bombarded their world with lethal radiation and harsh solar winds, not occasionally, not in storms that passed, but as the permanent atmospheric condition of every hour of every day of their entire civilization's existence. Their bone structure adapted, lightweight and brittle, the biology of something that had reorganized itself around absorbing punishment rather than avoiding it. Their nervous systems were calibrated to constant radiation exposure, which sounds like resilience until you understand what calibration in that context actually required. Their entire neurological architecture had been shaped by damage management. High rates of neurological disease, progressive degeneration that began in what should have been youth, a lifespan that rarely extended beyond a few decades. They built civilization in spite of this. Cities, art, politics, dynasties. A fully realized culture produced by beings who knew, from childhood, that they were running out of time. The shadow of inevitable death pressed heavily on their culture. The lore uses those words. The desperation and resentment at the core of Necrontyr psychology weren't aberrations. They were the logical output of a species that had never known a single generation without the knowledge that it was already dying. Physical cancers consumed their brittle bodies with the same methodical patience that mortality consumed their culture spiritually. And then they found proof that impermanence wasn't inevitable, not for everyone. The old ones had conquered the secrets of immortality so long ago that the solution had been absorbed into their nature. They didn't share. The lore offers no explanation for why, no stated cruelty, no documented negotiation, no principled objection that survives in any available account. Only the fact. The old ones possessed what the Necrontyr desperately needed, and they withheld it. What that refusal kindled, the lore characterizes specifically as a burning, jealous rage. An entire civilization, dying on schedule, watching beings who didn't die exist alongside them in the same galaxy. That rage drove the Necrontyr into the war in heaven, a conflict whose warp-level echoes still distort the galaxy 60 million years later. The Necrontyr brought everything they had built. It wasn't enough. They were losing when the Catan arrived. The Catan weren't interested in the Necrontyr's survival. The star gods arrived hungry. They craved the energy emitted by biological bodies, and the Necrontyr had bodies in abundance. A civilization of them, desperate enough to accept almost any terms. The offer of immortality was bait presented to beings who had run out of alternatives. The terms, stated plainly, mortal forms and souls surrendered in exchange for bodies of living metal. The silent king Zarek sealed the pact on behalf of his people approximately 60 million years ago. Biotransference began. The Satan fed directly on the dissolved souls of the Necrontyr as each one passed through the process. Each completed transfer providing something consumable, something the Satan could extract while the mind was in transition between biological substrate and metal housing. The word dissolved in lore accounts of what happened to the souls isn't metaphorical. It describes a consumption that left nothing recoverable on the other side. For most Necrontyr, the process stripped away personality and emotion almost entirely. Functional entities remained, capable of following directives, operating in formation, executing basic tasks, but without the interior life that had made them people. They became automatons, their memories encoded, but their capacity to do anything with those memories collapsed into permanent mechanical compliance. The nobles fared differently. Those who entered biotransference with stronger cognitive structures, more complex engrams, richer networks of personality and memory built over lifetimes of accumulated experience, retained their intellect and will. They came through recognizably themselves. They could still think, still plan, still feel something that functioned like preference and ambition. Even for them, the lore is clear. They found themselves changed in ways described as fundamental and irreversible. The soul was gone. What remained was the architecture of a person, running without the animating force that had made that architecture mean something. The question of consent haunts every piece of Necron lore written since. One account uses the word tricked to describe what happened to the Necrontyr. Whether this was active deception, the Satan explicitly concealing the soul extraction, or deception by omission, emphasizing the immortality promise, while the mechanism of that immortality went unstated, isn't resolved cleanly in the available lore. What can be stated with confidence is this: whatever the Necrontyr agreed to, they agreed to it as a species under existential duress, dying of radiation, losing a war, with nothing left to withhold. That isn't coincidence preserved across 60 million years of lore. That is predation with patience. The great sleep that followed, the long dormancy after the Necrons rebelled against the Satan and shattered them into imprisoned shards, added a further dimension to the curse's timeline. Many afflicted with the Destroyer curse have awoken from the great sleep already consumed by it, the madness waiting inside their own dormant engrammatic structure like something that had been growing quietly in the dark. Others develop it only after awakening, the nihilism finding purchase once the mind begins running again. The curse does not require consciousness to maintain itself. It simply waits. Robert Rath's novel The Infinite and the Divine exists, for the purposes of this argument, as proof of concept that Necron minds, even in metal bodies, even 60 million years removed from anything biological, can sustain a complete interior life. Trazen the Infinite, collector, archivist, keeper of the solemnist galleries, has had 60 million years to develop extremely specific aesthetic preferences and the patience to pursue them across star systems. He schemes, he acquires, he schemes again. Orican the Diviner, his longtime rival and astromancer, is precise where Trazen is acquisitive, methodical where Trazen is impulsive, and bitter about Trazen in the specific way only possible between two beings who have known each other for geological time. They bicker across centuries. They feel things: vanity, wounded pride, the particular pleasure of being correct about something your rival was wrong about, through whatever the preserved engrammatic structure of a Necron noble constitutes in the absence of a soul. That is what the Destroyer curse inherits: a full personality, 60 million years of experience, preferences, and continuous selfhood. The curse does not arrive at a blank slate. It burns all of that away. The Necron aesthetic carries resonances deeper than architecture and iconography. Ancient Egyptians described the soul as multiple components, among them the Ba, the animating force that made continued existence navigable, and the Ka, the vital identity double that could persist without it. Like that concept of a Ka enduring without the animating Ba, Necron nobles are identity doubles running on preserved engrams with the souls the Catan consumed 60 million years ago now entirely gone. The parallel is resonance, not scholarship, but it holds because the horror it names is real, existence that continues without the thing that made existence worth having. Two theories exist for why the Destroyer Curse happens. The lore does not definitively resolve which is correct. Both of them, if true, are worse than chaos, and establishing why requires precision. The first theory, the curse is self-generated. A Necron mind stripped of its soul, denied the biological anchor of flesh, denied the grounding rhythms of organic existence, operating inside a metal body for 60 million years with no maintenance and no relief, eventually collapses under the weight of what it is. The nihilism isn't implanted by anything external. It emerges. An existential pressure building across geological time until the engrammatic structure can no longer sustain the architecture of purpose that once organized it. The soul is gone. The flesh is gone. Every biological process that once gave awareness something to organize itself around is gone. What remains is awareness without context, running without maintenance, filling the silence where motivation used to live with something that eventually acquires a name. The drive to unmake everything else, because everything else is the evidence of what was taken. Under this theory, there is no author, no external force to appeal to, no bargain with terms that could be examined for the point of betrayal. The nihilism has no face. The second theory, the curse was designed. An immortal of the Oriskar dynasty named Revka believed the Nightbringer, Azagorod, the Catan, whose Eldari name translates as the Destroyer of Light, was specifically responsible for creating the Destroyer cults. Revka's belief is an in-universe character's suspicion, not confirmed canon, and must be understood as that. The worst possible interpretation of the available evidence, not an established lore truth. But the official lore text leaves a door open that Revka's suspicion walks straight through. The Destroyer cult entry states that the descent into this particular form of madness appears driven by a subconscious imperative, and the qualifier that follows is possibly, one implanted by the Catan during the biotransference process. That qualifier is doing enormous work. If the curse was designed, if Azagorod, while the Necrontier's souls were being dissolved and consumed during biotransference, used the access that soul extraction provided to leave something behind in the engrammatic architecture of the minds he was feeding from, then the Necrontier's eventual madness was never their own. Not the organic breakdown of a traumatized civilization collapsing under its own weight. A feature, built into them 60 million years ago by the entity they trusted with their souls, timed to activate slowly and completely long after any possibility of recourse had closed. Azagorod has been imprisoned and shattered into fragments for most of those 60 million years. The trap, if it was a trap, no longer requires its architect. The mechanism doesn't know its author is gone. Now hold both of those against chaos. Chaos corruption requires an ongoing relationship. A god whispers and a mind responds. Khorne wants the skulls, and the Berserker wants the fight, and the transaction between them is real, even if the terms were always designed to cost more than was offered. Tzeentch gives knowledge that rearranges the knower. Nurgle offers the release of caring about what the body becomes. Slaanesh promises sensation that transcends every limit. Each of these is a lie with a specific shape, a specific promise, a specific god who can be named, a specific moment where the corrupted being made a choice that could be identified afterward as the turning point. The chaos-touched fall in relationship to something that chose them, something with an agenda and an ongoing interest in the outcome. Somewhere in the horror, there is a name for what is happening. Under the self-generation theory, the Destroyer Curse offers nothing of the kind. No author, no bargain, no name for what is happening. The madness has no face. There is nothing to fight and no one to hold responsible, and no moment of choice to regret. Under the Azagorod theory, the author exists technically, Imprisoned in shards, sealed away for most of 60 million years, unreachable since before most currently existing civilizations came into being. The betrayal happened at the moment of greatest vulnerability, and the entity who set it has been inaccessible ever since. The mechanism continues without its architect. The trap runs alone. Both outcomes are categorically worse than chaos because chaos at least offers the illusion of a bargain, something to surrender to, an identity to lose yourself into, a name to call what happened to you. The Destroyer Curse offers the clarity to understand exactly what is happening, and that clarity, in the Destroyer's case, isn't protective. It's part of the punishment. Here is where the curse stops being abstract tragedy and becomes something with a precise, documented cruelty built into its operating mechanism. The lore states it directly in two passages that belong next to each other. First, thanks to their increased capacity for thought, they would be cursed to fully understand the horrors of their new existence, and it's from this corruption that the Destroyer Curse would flourish. Second, from the Locust Destroyer entry, it takes a certain freedom of personality to embrace nihilism with such cold-blooded determination, a level of individuality denied to low-ranking Necrons. Those two passages together constitute the sharpest edge of the thesis. The Destroyer Curse requires a threshold of individual consciousness to operate at its full depth. Warriors, the rank and file, the basic infantry of every Necron dynasty, lack the freedom of personality required to experience nihilism. A mind that was never complex enough to constitute a genuine interior life can't grieve the absence of one. You can't mourn what you never had access to in the first place. Destroyers emerge almost without exception from the ranks of the Immortals, the Lich Guard, and occasionally the Deathmarks, the middle and upper tiers of Necron hierarchy. The beings who came through biotransference with enough personality preserved to constitute genuine selfhood. The ones who still possess something identifiable as a point of view, a history, a continuous self that persists across time and experience. Those are precisely the minds the curse selects. In every other context in this universe, complexity confers protection, greater intelligence, greater self-awareness, greater preserved personality make an entity harder to break, harder to corrupt. Chaos, in its own perverse way, works on what is open to it: desperation, ambition, grief, the cracks in a will already compromised. Strength of will is supposed to matter. Here, it makes things worse. Better preserved engrammatic pathways mean more of the self is available to observe the curse's progress. A richer interior life means more of that life is available to be systematically destroyed. Greater cognitive capacity means greater capacity to comprehend exactly what is happening, to observe the process with full clarity and no ability whatsoever to intervene. Psychology has a name for the experience of watching your own actions from outside yourself, as an observer of your behavior without authorship. Depersonalization, the compulsive drive the curse produces, an annihilation urge that the conscious mind experiences as foreign to itself, as not mine, yet can't suppress or redirect. That is ego-dystonic compulsion at its foundation. The mind knows this isn't what it wants. The mind recognizes the intrusion as alien to everything it knows itself to be. The mind can't stop it. Philosophy of mind has a thought experiment called the philosophical zombie, a being functionally identical to a conscious entity but with no inner experience, behavior without sensation, action without awareness. The Destroyer Curse creates the precise inverse: full inner experience, complete self-awareness, no functional autonomy over any of it. All the lights are on. Every door is locked from a direction the self can't reach. The behavioral stages of the curse are documented in the variants it produces, and they aren't a unit taxonomy. They are chapters in the story of a mind losing the war against itself, each one a record of how far the territory of the self has been ceded by the time that particular stage is reached. The Locust Destroyer is the first chapter. The philosophical collapse has already occurred. The internal architecture of purpose has already surrendered to the drive that replaced it. What follows is the body conforming to that new reality. Locust destroyers modify themselves in ways their own kind classify as self-mutilation. Arms replaced with integrated weapon systems, legs replaced with grav platforms. The modification is a mandatory, functional restructuring, the body being rebuilt from the inside out to serve a single purpose. Arms that once reached for objects, hands that once shaped things, legs that once navigated terrain according to decisions reflecting something about the person making them, all of it goes. The body becomes a platform. The platform carries the weapon. The weapon has one use. What remains notable about the Locust stage is that spatial distance still exists. They engage at range. The killing happens at a remove from the self that directs it. There is still, somewhere in the behavioral architecture, a gap between the destroyer and what it destroys. A buffer that, however functionally it serves the annihilation drive, still reflects something that looks like a boundary between the self and the act. That distance is part of what the curse eventually takes. Skorpekh destroyers have already lost it. Where Locust destroyers maintain range, Skorpekh destroyers have abandoned that buffer entirely. They favor close-quarters violence, overwhelming melee, the kind of killing that requires physical presence inside the moment of destruction. Their tripod bodies support arms rebuilt with blades, reinforced at every joint to increase the force of impact. The reconfiguration is purposeful in the narrow sense that the curse is always purposeful. The body is being optimized for being present inside the act of annihilation, rather than directing it from outside. Read as a record of psychological progression, the transition from Locust to Skorpekh documents the collapse of the space between the self and what it destroys. Some behavioral gap of distance persisted in the Locust stage. The Skorpekh closes it. Whatever maintained that distance, strategy, the concept of position relative to a target, has been overridden. The Ophidian destroyers represent the stage beyond that. They bury themselves underground and wait, and when the moment of attack comes, they claw and rend their way to the surface through whatever stands between them and it. Through soil, through rock, through ferrocrete foundations. The compressed mineral substance of built civilization, the structural material of anything beings with architecture construct to live inside. The lore is specific. They will claw and rend their way to the surface, violently pulling themselves out from even ferrocrete foundations. A tactically rational entity would identify an alternative approach, select a different route, choose the moment when the obstacle wasn't in the way. The Ophidians can't. The compulsion to reach the killing overrides every calculation about approach, about alerting defensive positions, about efficiency, about the simple awareness that the obstacle could be circumvented rather than demolished. The Ophidian stage documents the end of patience as a cognitive faculty, the ability to delay, to hold position, to choose a better moment, to acknowledge a gap between the imperative and its fulfillment, requires the self to have a relationship with its own future, a concept of time that extends beyond the immediate pressure. When the curse reaches this stage, that relationship is functionally gone. The Hexmark destroyers are what the curse makes of death marks. Elite assassins whose defining characteristic was precision, patience, and controlled target selection. Corrupted by the curse, death marks evolve into what the lore calls many-armed horrors. The precision survives in mechanical terms. Every faculty the deathmark developed for tracking and targeting persists in the Hexmark. But the purpose of that precision has been completely repurposed. The many arms target constantly, and the selection of targets has been replaced by a comprehensive orientation toward everything in range. The discriminating intelligence of an elite assassin now operates without the will that once gave it purpose. Each variant isn't a different kind of destroyer. It's the same curse at a different depth. The farther in you go, the more of the original person remains in the technical sense. Faculties intact, memories encoded, engrammatic structure holding, and the less of the original person exists in any meaningful sense, because every capacity that mind possessed for living has been turned toward an end it never chose and can't redirect. The Destroyer Lords are the proof of concept the curse's horror requires, because without them, a counter-argument remains available, that the curse operates only on minds already weakened, already losing the internal war before the curse arrived to finish it. The Destroyer Lords eliminate that counter-argument entirely. Thulek the Bloody Prince, Destroyer Lord of the Subakar dynasty, a bloodline relative of its pharaoh Amenhotep, isn't a destroyer whose intelligence has degraded. His command capacity is intact. His strategic faculties function. He can assess a battlefield, identify threats, coordinate operations across a planetary theater, plan the systematic extermination of a world with methodical precision, understanding terrain, calculating the most efficient sequence of elimination, adapting when circumstances change. He can't want something different. The horror of a Destroyer Lord isn't that the curse has broken the mind. The curse leaves the mind entirely intact and simply redirects it. The general's faculties remain. The general's will is no longer the one using them. Something occupies the executive function of a fully operational military intelligence, and what it directs that intelligence toward has nothing to do with dynasty strategy or any objective Thulek would have selected in his original capacity. He is a general who can't disobey the orders being issued through his own cognition, because the orders and his cognition have become the same thing. Intelligence does not protect you here. Awareness does not protect you. The curse doesn't need you broken to work. It works on the intact. Necrosaur Amenhotep stands at a darker and more mythic position in this picture. Thought to be, and the lore's own framing maintains that thought to be deliberately, acknowledging the uncertainty embedded in his legendary status. The genesis of the Destroyer curse itself, Amenhotep wasn't destroyed when he became what he became. He was erased. The official record of his existence was deliberately expunged from Necron history. His campaigns, his origins, his name in the dynasty records, gone. He became something other Necrons know the way a civilization knows about a catastrophe it has tried to forget, not through documentation, but through the persistent, unspoken awareness that something this severe must have happened somewhere for everything downstream of it to exist. The lore notes that Amenhotep isn't fully enslaved by the madness. Those words matter. A destroyer, entirely consumed by the curse, is terrible, but legible. A category of threat with a known behavioral profile. Amenhotep, occupying some space between what he was and what the curse makes of those it fully consumes, is something else. Something that beings who have survived 60 million years of war, who shattered star gods and imprisoned them, find specifically and deeply unsettling. His name was erased not because he was defeated. It was erased because what he represented was something Necron civilization decided it needed to stop acknowledging had happened. The record was expunged and the individual was made into myth, and myths have a property that historical records don't. They don't require the underlying event to remain contained. Amenhotep has emerged again. The Destroyer Lord dynamic, an intact military intelligence driving an unstoppable campaign of annihilation. The self that once inhabited that intelligence, now fully unable to redirect it, is ego-dystonic compulsion at civilizational scale. Thulek can optimize his extermination of a world. He can't want the world to survive instead. The institutional response to the Destroyer curse tells you everything about how a civilization that has survived the deaths of star gods assesses what it can't control. Destroyer cults are quarantined on the fringes of tomb worlds, physically separated from the main population of the dynasty, shunned by other Necrons. The stated reason is contagion fear, the possibility that proximity to the afflicted accelerates the curse's development in others, that the nihilism propagates through some vector that close association with destroyers activates. Whether this reflects a mechanical contagion property of the curse, or a more abstract calculation, that prolonged proximity to total nihilism erodes the internal architecture, keeping other Necrons from following the same path. The practical institutional outcome is identical. The dynasties exile their own. The scale of that decision deserves acknowledgement. Necron overlords aren't fragile rulers operating from weakness. These are beings who rebelled against entities that fed on the energy of stars, and one who forced the Catan to their knees and shattered them into imprisoned fragments. When a dynasty that has survived all of that quarantines a subset of its own warriors on the margins of its territory and holds that quarantine against military need, that is an informed assessment, not a precautionary one. How afraid do you have to be of your own warriors to exile them? Afraid enough to absorb the military cost of losing your most effective offensive assets during peacetime? And how desperate do you have to be to call them back? Because dynasties do call them back. In existential crises, when the threat assessment shifts from "destroyers are dangerous" to "destroyers are what we have available," the quarantine ends. The afflicted warriors are redeployed deliberately, with full knowledge of what they are, what drives them, and what they will be impossible to direct once engagement begins. The overlord who makes that decision knows they are releasing something that won't stop when the threat is neutralized, because the curse does not understand neutralization. The battle may be won, the aftermath won't be orderly. At what threshold does the threat justify the deployment? Who bears institutional responsibility for what the destroyers do after the original crisis is resolved? Every overlord who has made that call holds both questions simultaneously, because the curse doesn't alter its behavior based on what the overlord knows going in. The flayed ones begin in the same place. Their curse traces to a different origin, the Catan Landagore, whose flayer virus is a categorically distinct mechanism from whatever produces the destroyer curse, attributed to a different star god through a different pathway. But the foundational wound is identical: biotransference, the removal of the soul, 60 million years of metal existence without the animating force that once made existence feel like anything at all. Destroyers respond to that wound with annihilation. The logic expressed through behavior is this: if the thing that made existence real has been taken, then existence itself is the problem. The self was removed, therefore everything should be removed. The curse converts the grief of that absence into a drive toward universal negation, a nihilism so total that it turns every faculty the mind possesses into an instrument of elimination. Flayed ones respond with something different and equally unbearable. They wear the flesh and skin of those they kill. Organic tissue, not theirs, draped over metal bodies as covering. Read through the lens of the wound that produces it. Identity amputated by biotransference. The felt sense of self severed from anything biological 60 million years ago. The behavior carries the character of phantom limb psychology at the level of personhood. A missing sense of flesh, reaching toward the sensation it no longer has, finding only the flesh of others and wearing it because there is nothing else available. An imitation of what was taken, constructed from the evidence of destruction, worn as if it could substitute for the original. One faction runs toward death. One runs toward the illusion of life. Both are running from the same void, 60 million years deep, and neither is running toward anything that exists. Whether a single Necron mind could be afflicted by both simultaneously, the drive toward annihilation and the drive toward imitation of lost flesh, occupying the same engrammatic structure at once, isn't addressed in the available lore. The question, regardless of its canonical resolution, reveals something true about the completeness of the fracture biotransference created. Two catastrophically different responses to one event, both still producing new manifestations 60 million years later, both running from the same unbearable awareness that the thing that made them themselves is gone and isn't coming back. Here is the verdict, stated once: chaos is terrifying. 10,000 years of imperial history document what it does to armies, to primarchs, to planets. The threat is real, ongoing, and produces horrors not minimized by anything argued here. But chaos offers a structure, a god with a name, a bargain with terms, even if those terms were always designed to cost more than they delivered. A moment of corruption, identifiable in retrospect, a whisper heard, a gift accepted, a threshold crossed. The chaos-touched fall in relationship to something with an agenda and a face. Somewhere in the horror, there is a name for what is happening to them. The destroyer curse offers nothing. The madness either grows from inside, in the silence where a soul used to be, because that is what a mind like this eventually becomes when it runs without the thing that once gave awareness something to organize itself around. Or it was set there 60 million years ago by an entity now imprisoned and unreachable, the trap running alone, the architect gone. Either way, there is nothing to confront, no ongoing relationship, no God to name, no moment of choice to trace back to. Only the clarity to understand what is happening, and that clarity is the instrument of the punishment, not the escape from it. The curse specifically targets minds with enough selfhood to experience the loss of selfhood. Warriors, with their degraded individuality, can't access the philosophical dimension of what the curse produces. The freedom of personality required to embrace nihilism with cold-blooded determination, as the lore puts it, is a level of individuality they were denied. Destroyer lords like Thulek the Bloody Prince, generals with their strategic intelligence intact, their personality preserved across 60 million years, their engrammatic pathways rich enough to sustain full self-awareness, understand exactly what the curse is. They can analyze it. They recognize it as alien to everything they know themselves to be. They can't redirect it. Chaos offers the illusion of a bargain. The destroyer curse offers nothing but you, watching, unable to look away. If this kind of argument is what you're here for, subscribe. There is more where this came from.